Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Severance Season 2. So in this video I will cover Severance Season 2 in its entirety. So if you have not seen all of Severance Season 2 up to the very last episode, you will not want to watch this video. Otherwise, things will be spoiled for you, which you don't want to do because this is an amazing show. So, I first saw Severance a couple years ago. It was the year that it came out, but it was like 6 or 7 months after it came out. So I binged it all at once. I was curious about this episode. I heard it was good. I just don't have Apple Plus, and I kind of was boycotting it just because there's too many fucking streaming services, and I'm upset that Apple has their own streaming service. But I was flying to New Zealand to visit my friends, and on the plane they had the first 3 episodes of Severance, so I watched it, and of course I was hooked. And I was like, I had to watch it, so while I was over there, I got Apple Plus. I think I just had it for a week so I could watch the rest of Severance, and I loved it. It was great. But I did think, I thought it was a really good show. I was super impressed. It was way better than I thought it would be. But I did think that it dipped a little bit in the middle of the season. It got dragged maybe a little bit. And then I was, of course, ended on a cliffhanger, so I was waiting for season 2 to come out like everyone else. And I was reading some sort of background information saying that there was a falling out between 2 of the showrunners, and they were arguing over. There was a lot of behind the scenes commotion and arguments, and they had creative differences, and they couldn't decide what to do. And then that combined with the 2 strikes really pushed it back, which is why it took 3 years for it to come out. So I was worried about season 2 because of that, because I felt like usually not always, but a lot of times when there is behind the scenes turmoil and things are taking longer to get going, that's usually a bad sign. It usually means that what you get is not going to be very good. So I was actually, to be honest, I was really worried about Severance Season 2, because I got the impression that they didn't really know which direction to take the show in, and that there was maybe that's why there was these creative difference fights behind the scenes. However, I will say, after having watched season 2 of Severance, I think it's even better than season 1. I was super impressed. It went from being an awesome show to one of the best shows I've ever seen. I kind of like to make a comparison to Lost. Not just the fact that it has mysteries and all that, but the fact that Lost in the season 1 was more of a mainstream show. It still definitely had the weird elements to it. They were oh, what the hell is going on? But for the most part, it was more accessible to the mainstream, and it felt a little bit more grounded in reality. But then season 2 came, and just the mysteries exploded and all the weird shit exploded, and it seemed more fantasy than the previous season had. And I think the same would apply to Severance. I think, don't get me wrong, season 1 was weird. It had a lot of stuff that was going on. I was that's fucking weird. But I still feel for the most part, it felt kind of grounded in reality, whereas season 2 felt like it was, an alternate timeline. It's not actually our timeline. And it felt more sort of delving deep into fantasy. Now, I'm not saying that the show changed direction, and I wasn't saying that's the case for Lost either. They just started out easy and then pushed, and particularly with Severance, I think they're doing a better job than Lost at pre-planning. Apparently, according to the showrunners, they are going to explain everything, and they do know what they're doing. I don't know. I've been burned so many times before with assurances about that, but I'll trust them for now. But yeah. So I'm not saying it's disconnected or disjointed, but it's definitely goes a lot deeper, and I'm saying that as a really good thing. I'm saying that as this is why the season 2 I think is a vast improvement on season 1. Did drag its feet a little bit towards the end of the season, which I'll get to, but it didn't drag out the way season 1 did. In the mid-season of season 1, I felt like they were it was too slow, and they were taking too long. It was kind of boring, to be honest, until it started to pick up towards the end of the season. Whereas I didn't get that with season 2 at all. Season 2 was every episode was an event. Even there was a couple link in a chain episodes, but even those were packed full of great drama, great scenes, and the characters just exploded, and it became one of the best shows in existence. Now, I had originally planned to cover every episode of season 2 as it aired, but I didn't do that because I'm trying to get away from doing that in general, covering new shows. I want to stick mostly with covering the old Star Trek episodes, because I'm trying to get through all of them. So that's where my focus lies. But I had to come on here to do the full-length season review. So anyway, I'm going to start. I want to go episode by episode, and you will have to excuse me if I get some sequences, put them in the wrong episode, because I some of these events kind of blend together. But I'll try my best. But I still think, to me, that was made the most sense to format this review is by going episode by episode. So, start with episode 1, which is Hello, Miss Cobel. So this, I was still uncertain about season 2. I was still unsure of it at this stage. Now, to be clear, this episode was pretty much what I expected it to be. I was hoping it wouldn't be this, but I was pretty sure it would be this. And by this, I mean not really reveal a whole lot of answers after the big finale. I mean, they did get into some, and it's kicked off in kind of a slow pace and kind of, introducing more mysteries, and you don't know what the fuck is happening, like the weird guy standing behind Mark. And I think that the stuff with the new employees, I really didn't like that at the time. In retrospect, I look back on it, it was kind of interesting, and they did reveal some things, and it was kind of quirky in the same vein of the show, but it felt like a distraction, kind of a waste of time. But it did serve a purpose, and that is, it proved that Mark was vital to the mission that that Lumen's trying to accomplish, because he run in and said to the board, I want my employees back, and they got them back right away. But here's what I'll say, though. I do think, and I do believe, that they changed direction from what they were implying in the season 1 finale to what they did in season 2. And I have a strong suspicion that's where the creative differences and behind the scenes trouble lies. And what I mean by that, and I know some people might disagree with me, but what I mean by that is, at the end of season 1, to me, it was heavily implied with the finale that they were going to try to bring Lumen down. And that was the whole point of doing the overtime contingency thing, is to let the outside world know what they were going through, what they were suffering on the inside. And I know, at least for Helly's part, she didn't care if herself didn't care if she died. She wanted to be fired. Like, she kept trying to leave. She tried to commit suicide. So she want, like, Lumen to go down, even if it means the end of her existence. Like, that's very clear. Not as clear with Irving and Mark, but still, they wanted to let the outside world know what the hell and the torture that they're going through. And the whole thing with, him talking to Devon about, this, let's talk to reporters, and so that's what I was expecting. I was expecting them to talk to reporters, and it was kind of like disappointing to see that kind of happen all off screen, and Milchek shows up and it was like, oh, look at all these reforms, oh, you guys are heroes, here's the newspaper, it's been 3 months and you're all heroes and everything's taken care of. So I found that a bit like I was cheated out of that storyline. And the other thing I'll say about season 2, which I'll get into more as we go, is that I feel like the stark difference between season 1 and 2 is that season 1, the innies still behaved, even though they were knew they were separate from their allies, they sort of treated it like they're sharing the same person, like they're two halves of the same coin. Whereas season 2, they seem to behave more like they're a totally different person, which actually isn't true, because I think it is more like the two halves of the same coin sort of thing. But it seemed like, but that gets a bit complicated with Hully because she can't stand her outie. So I understand why she would have this split sort of thing. But this is, when we get the theory that Hully is actually Helena in disguise, which will be proven to be true. I didn't catch this myself until I watched videos afterwards, but once it was pointed out to me, I was like, oh yeah, no. I think I was in disbelief at first. I was like, no, that's not her. But especially when we got to episode 3, I'm like, yeah, that's definitely her. So yeah, and we get introduced to Miss Wong, which is, I still don't really get, because she was just doing a fellowship, sort of a test. Why did I put someone in such an important job? Milchek's job in season 1 was, very important, yet they have, a student who's just applying for, a fellowship or whatever take over. It seemed a bit weird, but of course weird is part of the show. It just seemed like weird is always the tone of the show, so it did seem kind of in line with the having a child. I like the funny line you see from the trailer of the Mark W going why are you a child? It's because of when I was born. That's the same, that's the tone that the show is, the quirky little tone. The show is, apparently the original concept of the show was to be a comedy straight out, and there's still definitely elements of that remain in it. Reminds me of Breaking Bad in that sense, because there was a lot of comedic tones slipped in, a lot of sort of weird humor slipped into Breaking Bad, even though it was and they got a lot of comedic actors, stand-up comedians Bob Odenkirk and Bill Burr, and so they definitely had, and freaking even Bryan Cranston was originally from a sitcom, so it's similar to that I found this show. But anyway, let's get to episode 2, which is Goodbye, Mrs. Selvig. So this kind of alleviated, this is when my concerns started to alleviate. And I kind of knew after that first episode, or at least I was hoping, that the first episode was entirely focused on the innies. I was hoping that the next episode would entirely focus on the outies. And so I was very pleased to see that was the case, and some of my concerns were alleviated. However, the most interesting thing that I found with this episode is the reveal that it hadn't been 3 months or however many months Milchek said it was, that he was lying. It has only been a weekend, and they made all that shit up to try to trick the innies to being more obedient. Which I gotta be honest, I think that was the smart direction to go in. I think if they sort of tighten a leash, as Drummond would say later on, that would have been a bad idea. And of course, Drummond was apparently against Milchek's reforms and thought it was a bad idea. But I actually think he's wrong. I think this was like a smart thing to do, to realize that the more you push back on them, they're just going to be less compliant. And as we'll learn as the season goes by, that they really, really need Mark to finish his job, and they need Mark. And because he's so insistent that the other innies come back. But anyway, so but yeah, that was sort of an interesting reveal that it only took place over a couple of weekends. But I still feel like they kind of forgot about trying to draw attention to the suffering that the innies were going through. That it seemed like Devon she was promised and was like, oh, let's go to reporter. She didn't do any of that. Instead, they were focused more on Mark saying she's alive. But it is interesting that they didn't really believe it at first, and they were doubting themselves. But you could tell that Audi Mark had inner doubt. Like, even though he would be like, oh yeah, sure, no, that's definitely not what he meant. He had that strong doubt, and so did Devon. It was like a nice scene when Milchek came over to talk to them about it, and you could Devon like hid. I think it was a picture of Gemma or something. She hid something from him because she knew that he's full of shit and that he's lying. And I know this is a later episode, but Rickon really didn't factor into this season that much at all. In season 1, he was way more prominent. And, I mean, part of me doesn't mind that because I do think he was kind of a waste. And, again, they were trying to do this, weird humor with him, which I didn't find all that funny. So I actually didn't mind that he didn't feature as much in season 2, but it did seem like a change in direction, like they just dropped him because they didn't know what to do with him. They had a side plot, which, as I said, is a bit later on, but they had a side plot with him, writing an updated version of his book, but it's sort of, and it created a bit of a rift between him and Devon because she could see that he's selling out, that he's kind of changing the message to basically be on board with Lumen's corporate brainwashing, which again is like shows that Lumen's clever, and it's clever for them to take something that they see that inspired the innies and corrupt it and use it for their own purposes. It does show how devious that Lumen is. But yeah, so. And then you see, I can't remember if it's this episode or the next one, but where Mrs. Cobel, I think it was later, Miss Cobel, when she tries to negotiate with Helena, and she gets scared and freaked out and runs away because she sees this dude standing there, which is heavily implied that he's like a severed guy who kills people. He's severed so he doesn't have to remember killing people, and I think she realized she knew that's what it was. But anyway, yeah, I think that happens in a later episode, but still. So yeah, so then the next episode was Who Is Alive? Maybe that scene happened in this episode, I can't remember. I think it was, but anyway, so then we go back to getting both innies and outies. And it's interesting, you get sort of Mark and Helly, Mark S. and Helly sort of trying to figure out like where his ex-wife is, or his Addie's wife, I should say, and sort of coming to terms with it. But of course, this is still Helena, and there's a bit more clues given. And this episode has the way that she behaves, and of course, on the outside, Marcus is trying to do this thing where he's implanting, like, trying to drill something into his retinas, and then Ragabi shows up at the end of the episode saying, like, that's not going to work, it's just going to make you go blind. But then she's willing to work with him to try to reintegrate him. He assures him that's his only choice, and so they get started on reintegration. And I will say, this is the one sort of frustrating thing for me for the season, although I can understand why they did it this way. I think maybe they should have waited a bit longer to introduce this, because it's obvious to me that they were dragging this whole reintegration thing out for a long time. I don't know. It just seemed that way to me. It seemed like the reintegrating thing shouldn't have taken like forever. Like, so they first introduced it at the end of this episode, and then they kept finding new ways to like push it back, and by the end of the season, like, it's not even that big of a deal. They're not like seeing parts of each other's lives, whereas like Petey was full on like reintegrated. And she says, like, Ragabi was assuring Mark that, Petey only died because he wasn't following her directions exactly. But you do get the sense that she's not that trustworthy, and that she doesn't really know what she's doing. So, but it shows how desperate Addie Mark has, because she confirms that his wife is still alive, and so that freaks him out. And we also get some stuff with Irving talking to the other people in the department Bert used to be in, and finding about the hallway. He had a nice scene in episode 1 I skipped over, where Dylan convinces Irving to stay, which that was really nice. And of course you get the beginning of a Dylan storyline with meeting his Audie's wife, which is kind of interesting. So anyway, episode 4, Rose Hollow. This was the big event episode for the mid-season, and it was definitely really turned up the weird. Like, the weird levels were really, really high. Almost to the point of, I might even say, dare I say, pretentious a little bit came off as. Just a tad. But I did like this episode overall. Maybe I didn't think it was like the greatest thing since sliced bread, as some people did, but the concept of the Ort bow, like, because we saw scenes of this in the trailer of them like outside wearing these winter clothing, and I was like, that must be their Addies, but it's not. It's their innies going on an outdoor excursion, and it does kind of make sense. And this is, we get weird shit with Irving and his nightmares and dreams, and you could tell that he's starting to get super suspicious of Helly. And Helly and Mark have sex, although it's not Helly, it's Helena pretending to be Helly, which is certain levels of fucked up, which will have effects on the show going forward. But for the most part, it was just weird on top of weird. But and especially the dreams that Irving had. But the ending was like a gut punch of Irving trying to kill Helena because he realized who she was, and yelling at Milchak to bring Helly back right away, and he does, but then he fires Irving, which effectively kills him. And they didn't because they cut this episode when Irving B or whatever the Ennie is fired, but they don't show Irving's Addie waking up in the middle of being outside and wet and surrounded by the other Ennies and being like, what's going on? So I don't know. I mean, I guess they could have escorted him out immediately, but yeah, seemed like they should have waited to disconnect him, but they needed to have that dramatic. But anyway, so no, I did really enjoy this episode. Wasn't he throws all the marshmallows in the fire? So this is marshmallows or for team players or some shit like that. Anyway, so Trojan Horse is basically the follow-up, the cleanup to this. We get the funeral for Irving with the watermelon head. And of course dealing with the consequences, and we finally get the return of actual Helly, and how outraged she is that she was being mistaken. This is when Mark S. sort of starts to become sort of disenchanted and apathetic because he was being fooled by Helena the whole time, and so they know that means that the Lumen on the outside know everything about what they were doing in the inside about trying to find Gemma and stuff like that. So he's like, Helly from her perspective is really interesting because she is just waking up from going on the overtime contingency at season 1, and the first thing she wakes up and she's being told that her Addie has been impersonating her, and Mark S. doesn't really want to have anything to do with her and doesn't care about finding out more information. He doesn't even tell her. Like at the start of season 1, they all compared notes, but here he's like disillusioned, and so you really feel bad for her because she's really out of the loop, and of course she does feel violated, which again is a really interesting sci-fi concept, the way they play with, even though technically they are the same person, but essentially they're two different people, and she had her identity stolen in a sense. So it's a really interesting dynamic way to look at things. And and they continue the storyline a little bit, again going at a snail's pace with Mark S. doing his, Audi Mark doing his reintegration. So so it's a cog in the machine, but again, as I said, even these cog in the machine episodes were still really good and had a lot of good character interactions. So the next one is Attila. I don't remember exactly what happens in this episode. I know from the title that it's when Addie Irving, because Indy Irving's dead now, it doesn't appear for the rest of the episode, but Addie Irving goes on this dinner date with Bert and Bert's husband, and how that's a bit weird, and they were definitely throwing in hints that Audi Bert is not a good person. And I think the way they handled that, like that whole scene was like really creepy, and the way they handled that, was really good. So I can't remember I think this is the episode it definitely is. This is the episode where Mark S. had actual sex with actual Helly, because she's like, well, it's unfair that she took that experience from me and she got to experience that, so I want to experience it. And so it shows, again, the romance, which I wasn't sure if they were going to go full in on the Mark S. Helly romance, but they did. And so it definitely cranks things up in that regard. And then in the outside, you do have Helena, like, having that, like, kind of weird conversation with Addie Mark. Like, I still don't really get what her objective was, what her purpose was for talking to him, maybe trying to manipulate him. Like, that was a bit weird. But it pushed Mark S. Addie Mark. It pushed Mark to go through with the reintegration, with the taking the chip out, or doing some shit with the brain surgery, which Mugabe wanted to do, and he very rightfully was like, no, I don't fucking want you to to cut into my brain in the middle of my basement. Like, fuck this shit. And I think he's very smart, but Helena coming to visit him pushed him over the edge, and then he was just like, fuck it. Let's, screw it, because he could tell that Lumen was really up to no good, and he could tell that, pissed at them for having his wife held captive or whatever, and he was like, fuck it, I need to know what's going on, let's do this shit. And again, I felt kind of, and again, this is kind of maybe next episode, but I felt kind of cheated, because it felt like, oh, this is it, they're going to be fully integrated now, but not really. That didn't really happen. He was just like feeling really sick, and had a hole in the back of his head, and this collapsed, and so Devin shows up and insists on calling Mrs. Selvig or Miss Cobel, and that's I don't know. This is a case where I think I felt the heavy hand of the plot, because in character she doesn't really have any reason to believe that Miss Selvig would help them. That she would be, I don't know, maybe she said she was aware that she was fired, and maybe that's all she was going off of. But I feel like Ragabi was like correct to be like, no, you can't trust her at all. Anyway, all this shit actually I think is happening in the next episode. I think I jumped to the next episode already, which is Chikhai, I believe is how you say it. So we got a few of these, the continuation of the scenes I just covered with Marquez having this thing. Yeah, and I think at the end of this episode is when Ragabi fucks off, which I was kind of pissed off that they had her out, but again, kind of the heavy hand of the plot, like, oh, we want to move on to having Mrs. Cobel help them now. But I'm not complaining too heavily, don't get me wrong. It's still interesting stuff. But of course, the main thing about this episode was the flashbacks. And this is what I mean by this is when the story, like, you can tell they're purposely pushing it back, because they got to the point where, they started his reintegration at the end of episode 3, but then they had the Ortbo, then they had them talking about the consequences of the Ortbo, and then finally at the end of season 6, they're like, full on, let's go full on and take it in. And then after that, like, they just push it back. They have a flashback episode, then they have a Miss Cobel episode, and so they just keep pushing it back. Which, again, don't get me wrong, I'm not complaining too loud about this. I'm not saying it ruins the season. It just was a little bit frustrating in the moment, especially watching it weekly. I think maybe I wouldn't have been as bothered by it if I was binging. And but it tells me, like, especially at the end of episode 8, I was aware, like, they're not going to get into the full reintegration thing until season 3, which is kind of disappointing because they started it in episode 3. But that being said, I do like what they did. Anyway, with this episode, the flashbacks were amazing. So again, I'm not complaining too heavily. And like the whole way it was shot, the way it was edited, and of course we learned a lot of vital information. We actually see what Gemma has been going through. Yeah. So it's a big episode for like learning the backstory. Even if the storyline with Mark's reintegration is being slowly delayed, we get a lot of other great stuff, a lot of great backstory, and find out exactly what she's been going through, and that they're creating all these different personalities and like testing it and have her go through horrible experiences in order to, while severed, so that to try to test it so that people never had to experience anything difficult in their lives. And that you find out that's the goal, and you also find out the horror that Jim has been going through, and of course getting the backstory again, the flashbacks with seeing Mark before Jim had died and how he was a totally different person, and he was more like his innie, more cheerful, and how their lives used to be much brighter. But then, they had the scenes about the miscarriage, was kind of implying that Lumen is responsible, and you see a lot of sort of hints thrown in there. So really clever shit, really great episode. So the next episode, Sweet Vitriol, this is the one that bothered me more. The other one didn't bother me as much because, as I said, it was great and it had a lot of great revelations, even though I knew they were pushing the storyline back. But this one bothered me way more. I don't agree that this was definitely my least favorite of the season, and I don't agree that this was a good pacing idea to not show Miss Cobel since, I believe, episode 3. Not show her since episode 3, and then have her pop up and have a whole episode devoted for her and only her and nothing else. And it was a short episode too, and it was dragged out. I found it kind of boring, to be honest. It was just dragged it out. It was very slow paced, and when we got to the end of it, I was like, fuck, that's it? Jesus Christ. I was really pissed off. And not that it was a terrible episode. I just feel like that they should have took these scenes with Miss Cobel and integrated them into the episodes instead of devoting an entire episode. I think that was a bad pacing choice. They could have sprinkled these scenes in throughout episodes, maybe not 4, because 4 needs to be the outbow, but episodes 5, 6, and maybe not 7 because that's the flashback thing, but then have 8 be more of an integrated. So mix it in between episodes 5 and 6, and then have this episode be the final one where she confronts her grandmother, whoever that is. I'm assuming it was her grandmother. So you could have it take up the majority of the episode, but have more shit with the innies and the outies and all the other shit, and don't just cut straight to, don't just have the fucking whole episode about it. I don't know, I just didn't like that. That bothered me a lot. So then episode 9, it was obvious to me that this was penultimate episode, setting up for the finale. And again, so it's they set up for the storyline of Mark having brain surgery in his basement in episode 6, and they just delayed it until we get to the penultimate episode of the finale, which is where things come to a head particularly with Irving. So it's the last time we see Irving for the season. We do get confirmation that Bert was in fact a killer, and I didn't really get this at the time, or a hitman for Lumen, but I didn't get this at the time, but I watched some videos that kind of implied that because Bert was saying, I didn't kill anybody, I just drove them to a place. So I thought that meant that he drove them to a place and they had hired someone else to kill him. But then it was explained to me, and this makes total sense, that he was severed, and so his other person was him that killed him, but it wasn't his consciousness. It was a different severed part of him. I wouldn't really call him any because he's not inside anything, and that explains the discrepancy in the earlier dinner scene where Bert, what his husband was saying, he's been severed for 20 years, and Bert's like, no, you're wrong, this Severance has only been around for 10 years, and so he was definitely severed before Severance was a real thing, and so this explains that he was a killer. So it is very ominous, those scenes with Bert and Irving, and you are thinking that he's going to kill him, but instead he lets him go. And that was actually quite emotional, quite traumatic, that that Bert was, Irving was insisting, please, let's be together, let's stay together. And Bert's like, no, we can't do it. You gotta leave. Don't tell me where you're going, but you never return. So, is this the last of Irving in the show? I seriously doubt it. In fact, I very, very much hope so that it isn't, because they've been hinting at a lot of stuff with Irving. We still don't know like exactly what was going on. We knew that he was gathering information on looming, that he was trying to communicate messages to his innie. So, and we hear him on the phone. We still don't know who is on the other end of the phone. So I think we need to learn these things. So I do think that he will appear again in season 3. But then, so the Dylan thing also comes to a head because I think it was a couple episodes ago that he was like kissed his wife, or his wife kissed him, and then at the start of this episode, she confesses this to Dylan's outie, and he's outraged, and so forbids her from seeing him again. So she shows up and says goodbye to any Dylan who's crushed. And completely crushed, and wants to quit, which is basically killing himself. And so this is where I feel like they're not treating them as two sides of the same coin. They're treating them as two separate, totally different people, because I feel like they should at least like, I get why Outie Dylan is pissed off and feels cheated on. Like, I get that. I'm not saying he's wrong to feel that way, but I think he's not, particularly when we get to the next episode with his letter, like, he's not taking into account that it's him. It is still him. It's just another side of him. It's two sides of the same coin. It's a different consciousness, but it's still his. It's still his body, not just his body, but his being. Like, it's still his personality. It's just a different side of it. And they're acting like, oh, he's a totally different person, and that's not really his wife, but it kind of is. Like, this is where it gets really weird and strange. Like, the whole concept of the Severance thing. So I like it. I like the way they played with this, and it was sort of an emotional thing. And also it left Helly alone, because Mark played hooky that day because he's out, like, you know, doing the reintegration thing, and has a hole in his head or whatever, and is hooking up with Miss Cobel. And Dylan's just depressed and wants to quit, and so he doesn't give a shit about helping with any of this. And Irving's already fired, so Helly's on her own for this, and she has trying to figure this, trying to investigate what the hallway is and this other stuff. So yeah, and on the outside with the thing with Miss Cobel, that was interesting. The Outie Mark not quite being able to trust her and thinking it's ridiculous. But again, it's kind of the heavy hand of the plot. Just so happens that she has an axe to grind with Lumen. They lucked out on that, quite frankly. That just so happens that, because if this was her in like episode 3 before they tried to kill her, or threatened to, then things would have been different. She would have turned them in right away and would have been totally Lumen. So it's like a little bit heavy-handed the plot, but it was lucky for them. But it makes sense that Mark was still not doubting her, and it was a very interesting combo. And Devin sort of laying it out. It's like, look, we don't have a choice. We have no other options. I guess that's for like trying to get Gemma out. Because, but I do like Miss Cobel reveals that once Cold Harbor is finished, Gemma dies. Like, this was implied, but this is the first time we're like flat out told that, and had the effect that this has on Mark's Addy and how he's freaking the fuck out. So it was a powerful cliffhanger. They go to the cabin. We see any Mark show up, and again, it feels a little bit different because he seems like, I don't know, to me it felt off the way he seemed upset to see Devin. It's like, what the fuck am I doing here? His first instinct was to leave, because before he seemed really like they went out of their way to do the overtime contingency. So before he seemed very interested in, you know, talking to his Addie. And I know things have changed since then. I know that he like Lumen is not like outright torturing them anymore, but he still doesn't trust them, and now he's in love with Helly, and so would rather like be with her. So I get that, but I still feel like his reaction of like not wanting to see Devin, it's like, what the fuck am I doing here? I don't know, that it seemed a bit off to me, but maybe I'm wrong. Everyone's probably going to disagree with me. But yeah, so then we get to the big finale, Cold Harbor. This was great. This was better than the season 1 finale. This was epic. It was everything sort of coming to a head. I love, so a lot of interesting things to talk about with this. First is the scene with Jaime talking to Helly. This was very interesting. I think this has strong implications for where the show is going. Because this is the one thing at the end of this episode, it's like, what the fuck are they gonna do in season 3? Like, they're gonna have to completely change the show, and that's something you sort of know early on. Like, early in the season, I sort of figured that a huge shift is gonna have to come for there to be the season 3, because they made it very clear that they only need Mark to complete Cold Harbor, and they make it clear that Cold Harbor will be completed soon. And so I could tell somewhat early on in season 2 that it was going to happen by the end of season 2. So it made me think, like, well, if they're just going to fire him and get rid of him and they have more further use for him, then how are they going to continue things? And there's another way that we know that I can see it after the finale, that which I'll get to shortly. But the thing with Helly kind of gives you a window. The fact that Jaime says, I don't love my daughter. And I love her response. It's the right response. Oh, you're such a great father. He's like, oh, I sired many other, but none of them, I didn't see Kier in any of them, but I see Kier in you. And then she's like, yells at him, threatens him, I'm going to burn this whole place to the ground. And his response is, there he is. So this is very interesting. This is a glimpse of where they're going to go in the future, because it seems like one of the possibilities is that they're going to that he would rather have Helly as a successor than Helena. It's going to be interesting, though, because I've heard some people speculate that she's going to take over Lumen and Helly's going to run the things. And you get the scene earlier in the earlier episode where Milchek is dressing down Helly, and she's like, "Well, I'm an Egan," and she was like, no, your Addie is my superior. You are not. I am your superior. But it's going to be interesting if they sort of change that. But I don't know. It's hard for me to see that Helly R would ever accept working with or working for Lumen or being in charge of Lumen. It seems like maybe she would like fool herself to think, oh, we're gonna reform it and do something better, and maybe this is gonna be the only way these innies could continue to exist, which would be very important to them. So I do think, and this scene does give you that hint that might be the direction that they're going in. The fact that Jaime likes Helly, the innie, better than the outie, and doesn't really care for the outie because she's too subservient, she's too compliant, she wants someone with the fire in her, and so prefers the innie. So that's really fucking interesting. And then of course at the start, the other thing at the start of this episode was amazing. It's fucking one of the best scenes of the season, or probably the best scene of the season, was Mark's innie and outie talking to each other through the video camera. So fucking good. And the way it was shot was so amazing. And I love how they edited it, because at first they were showing them like recording the camera and going outside, but then as the conversation went on, they picked up the pace and made it feel more like an actual conversation of two people talking to each other. It was fucking good. And it was intense, like, too, as well. Now, At first, I was a little bit rejecting of how suspicious any mark was of Audi Mark, because it seemed again like a shift change since season 1, but things have changed, to be fair. And so I heard the comparison made that Audi Mark is pretty much treating any mark the same way that Lumen treated any mark at the start of the season, by trying to appease them, by trying to manipulate them, and saying, oh, here are all these reforms, I'm just trying to help you, and they're just doing that to get what they want from him. And in a sense, yes. I don't think it's the exact same thing, and I think the video I watched was implying it was pretty much the exact same thing, and implied like malicious intent to Audi Mark, which I totally disagree with. I totally think that Audi Mark is not intending, he doesn't have malicious intent. I think when he says stuff to any mark like, I'm not going to abandon you, I can't abandon my wife, but I'm not going to abandon you either, I think he's being sincere. I don't think he's just bullshitting. I don't think he's blowing smoke up any mark's ass. So I think it's, whereas Lumen at the start in season 1 were like, oh, we care, like they're totally full of shit. They're totally blowing smoke up their ass to get what they want. So that's where the difference is. Now, to be fair though, there's definitely similarities. The similarity is, and when any mark says, oh, well, it's weird that, you're only interested in my personal life when you want something from me, I think he 100% has a point. 100% has a point there that, and again, I don't imply malicious intent with Audi Mark, but I think without being aware of it, he is using him and trying to manipulate him to get his own means. Like, I think he has like the best of intentions, but he's just all he's concerned about is getting his wife back. And so he is trying to do whatever is possible to accomplish that goal, and he's not really that concerned about his innie. His innie is a secondary concern, I shall say. Like, again, when he's trying to be nice to his innie and trying to say, no, apologizing to him and saying, I know what you're going through, and I didn't mean this to happen, and I'm glad you had a nice life. Like, I don't think he's lying at all. I think it's all totally 100% sincere. But just because of the situation he's in, he is not really taking any Mark's situation into account. And he is exaggerating about the reintegration. He's like, look, you're not going to die necessarily because we're going to do this reintegration thing. But there is no guarantee that the reintegration will work. And here's the thing, when any Mark says, oh, you're just going to abandon me once you have your wife back, even if that's not his intention in the moment, that is still a strong possibility, because his reintegration thing is fucking dangerous. He could die from it. He saw Petey die. And so there is a strong possibility, even if he doesn't believe it at the moment, that he'll be like, well, it's not worth the risk. I have what I want now. So the more I think about it, the more I think any Mark is right to be not trusting and being suspicious and being hostile towards Audi Mark about it. So the more I think about it, the more I think that makes total sense. But I just don't think it's fair to compare Audi Mark to Lumen. Like, I think the difference is malicious intent. And I think that does make a difference. But anyway, I love the scene where any Mark like ends it, where he says, like, if the next thing I see isn't the severed floor, then he's never gonna fucking see his wife again. Like, he's making it clear, and then he walks outside and they cut straight to him showing up on the severed floor. I love that. Love these transitions. The whole way it's edited is so beautiful. And then of course we get a lot of typical weirdness like awesome weirdness of Severance with the whole comedy routine and the marching band when they finished Cold Harbor. It was great. But backing up before that, though, the conversation that Helly has with Mark, and I do like how most of it occurred off screen, but you can infer that Mark brought Helly up to speed on what his Audi was telling him, and how he's hesitant to do it, and he's like, I want to be here with you. Oh, and the other thing I glossed over was Miss Cobel telling him when Mark S was refusing to cooperate, being like, look, there's not going to be any happy ending between you and Helly. Like, she's an Egan, and they don't give a fuck about you. And she's not lying, and I think Mark S can see the sincerity in that, and that's when even Helly even says, like, can you trust Miss Cobel? And he's like, she was different. So he definitely sees, and she is being honest, absolutely, and I think he sees the truth in that, which is why they do kind of trust him. So he's kind of in an impossible situation because he's screwed either way, and that's what Helly says. So I was like, well, if we're screwed anyway, you might as well stick it to Lumen. And I understand why that would be their attitude. And so because he's unsure if he's going to go through with it. But then and it was a really emotional, very powerful scene that he's like, I'm going to die either way. My best chance is to help my Audi and hope this reintegration thing happens. Which he realizes isn't the best chance either, but he knows that his chances with Lumen are less. And plus he's, pissed off with them and wants to stick it to them. So you had the whole sequence was like super intense and amazing with the marching band and the big fight with him and Drummond. You get Brianna Tarth, who we saw earlier as one of the goat people. As soon as they showed her with the goat, and she was like, how many more? Like, I knew she was going to intervene on Mark's behalf. But I liked it. It worked, and I could kind of tell that Drummond was going to die there. I could see, he's a Season 2 character, kind of like the security guy was a Season 1 character. But yeah, so that was a super intense fight. It was such, an amazing scene when he was going in the elevator down, and he was like, my Audi's going to show up, and then he switches over and then kills him during the process unintentionally. And the whole thing with Audi Mark down there trying to rescue Gemma was interesting. Now, what I liked, what I thought was interesting, though, to think about is, and what has implications for what might come in Season 3, is James watching on the computer and seeing Mark show up to rescue his wife, and how the other dude was like, don't listen to him, and he's like covered in blood, looks like a scary guy, and the voice is saying don't listen to him, yet she does trust him, and she leaves the room, and James starts yelling, fuck! Now, what I realize when I think about it is that he's not, because the first reaction would be, oh, he's yelling fuck because Mark's stealing her away and he's fucking up her, his whole experiment, and he had plans and whatever, but then I realized that it's actually not that. The reason why he's so upset is because it just disproved his whole experiment. Like, the whole process, the whole point was to prove that she was completely severed and doesn't remember anything of her previous life. And that's probably why they had her. Because I was wondering why they even had her up as Miss Casey in the previous season. But the more I think about it, I think that was another test to have her interact with any Mark and to see if there was any spark between the two of them. But there wasn't. And Miss Cobel even brought one of the candles that Gemma used to have that she stole from Mark's basement, brought it and had her light it in front of him to try to see if it sparked anything, and there was nothing. And so all the tests have all been about trying to see if they could break the barrier, if the barrier would hold, if she would have any recognition. And in this moment where she trusts this strange guy covered in blood and goes with him, kind of proves that the barrier didn't hold. And that's why he was pissed off. Not because Mark S. was stealing her away, but because his whole chip, Cold Harbor, failed, basically. And it proved that the barrier did not hold. And again, so what I mean by implications for Season 3, because the implication during Season 2 is once they get what they want, once they complete Cold Harbor, they're done with Mark and there's no reason to keep him around. But Cold Harbor failed. Not because Gemma ran away, but because the barrier didn't hold. And so now they're going to have to start from scratch, and they're going to try to start again. And I don't know if they would need Mark for that exactly, but yeah. So that's very interesting to think about, and it was interesting. Also interesting to think about. It's been pointing out like the different combinations of Mark and Gemma, because at first it's this weird, the new Any Gemma and Outie Mark. And then she switches back to real Gemma, and then you have real Gemma and Outie Mark together. And then they go up the flight of stairs, and it's Miss Casey and Mark S., which was a nice sort of awkward moment that they were in the middle of kissing. They're like, oh, why are you at least Mark S. knew more. Like, he could get why they were kissing, because he knows that that's his Outie's wife, but of course he wouldn't be interested in kissing her. But he at least would understand, whereas Miss Casey would be so confused, like, what the hell is going on here? But then, so we get that combination, and then Mark S. pushes Miss Casey out the door, and she becomes Gemma again, but it's Gemma, Outie Gemma with Any Mark, and then Any Mark refuses to leave. Now, this frustrated me a little bit when I first watched it, but the more I think about it, the more I'm okay with it. Because in the moment, I'm just like, when she's screaming at Any Mark to go, I'm like, go! Like, go! Go! Like, because I thought that he had already, like, decided that he's screwed either way, and that his best option is to just the reintegration. And so you need to go out and go with Gemma in order to get the reintegration, and that's his best choice of survival. And I thought Helly said the same thing. So when Helly showed up, I thought she was going to tell him to leave. Say, no, please leave. It's the best chance you have to live. Just go. And I thought we were going to get a very dramatic scene like that. So I was kind of irritated, like, when he was just standing there and not going. And then when he ran off with Helly, I was like, well, what the fuck do they hope to accomplish? Like, he's just screwing himself because, yes, the reintegration's a long shot. But by staying, that's a no shot. So he's screwing himself by staying with Helly. But again, as I said, the more I think about it, and I've watched like interviews with the people involved in the show and reviews, and it sort of made me feel a lot better about it, with sort of explaining it. So one of the possible explanations is that he doesn't care. I think someone involved with the show said they're only thinking like 10 seconds ahead. They're just like, if I'm going to die, I want my last moments to be with Helly, with the woman I love, so fuck it. And he accomplished what he meant to accomplish. He saved Gemma, and she's free now, but he has no attachment to her. He's not in love with her, he's in love with Helly. So he's like, well, I don't want to go with her, because it won't even be me. I want to stay here, and if I'm going to die, I want my last moments to be with her. And so I think that makes sense. That actually does make sense, that they want to spend their last few moments together. But it does leave a huge, giant-ass question mark as to what is going to go on in Season 3, how the show is going to continue after this point. And there's several different avenues. I think we will have a new dynamic where we'll have Gemma on the outside, hanging out with Devin and Rickon, and Mark might be trapped on the inside and not allowed to leave, and for whatever reason. And so then the dynamic will change from Gemma being trapped in Lumen to Mark being trapped at Lumen, and so that Mark's Addy essentially, well, not dies, but goes away, is non-existent because they're not letting Mark leave Lumen. That might be interesting. And the whole thing with maybe Helly, like, taking over and becoming Milchek's boss. Like, there's some interesting avenues. Also, I didn't touch on the whole thing about Milchek starting to get pissed off with Lumen, which, you know, he yelled at Drummond. They did those racist paintings and shit, and he was definitely bothered by it. And so you can see that he that has to be leading somewhere too. And there's still the thing with Miss Cobel on the outside, and there's still the thing with but here's the thing: if Mark does stay, if my theory is right, and he does stay, it's possible that the reintegration, because that process already started, that it could continue, and you could see Audi Mark inside of Lumen, which might be interesting. So there's a lot of interesting possibilities that the show could go in. So fuck, I hate having the way. They say it's definitely not going to be 3 years, but it's probably going to be at least 2. Like, I don't think they even officially renewed it yet for season 3. So or maybe they did, but it's gonna suck having to wait this long. But yeah, so this season was amazing. Yeah, probably up there as one of my favorite seasons of all time, I would say. And season 1 wasn't that. I loved season 1, but it wasn't one of my favorite seasons of all time. This one is. So 10 out of 10 is my rating. A 10 the best. Obviously, I think the season was amazing, even through my minor complaints about the pacing, episode 8 being out of place. None of that really bothered me so much that I would think this is not an amazing season. The good overwhelmed the bad and smothered the bad, whereas the point, like, yeah, I have my little nitpicks here and there, but overall, what they did, like, justifies it, because it's amazing. Just one of the best shows I've seen. So that is it for my review of Severance Season 2. If you're watching this video the day it's being released, you can check me out tonight. I'll be over on my sister's channel, Alyssa Jean Review. I'll put the link in the description. I'll be doing a live discussion with her about Season 2 of Severance. And if you're watching this video later, well, you can check that video out in the archives by clicking that same link and checking out our discussion. So yeah, be sure to check us out for that. Thank you for checking out this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to check out my channel, as I cover many other shows and movies. As I said, at the moment, mostly Star Trek. At the moment, covering Deep Space Nine and Voyager, episode by episode. And yeah, so be sure to check out my channel so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.